Hey guys, in Algebra Lesson 1 we talked a little bit about using x as a container for a number, and today we're going to expand on that idea and substitute different numbers in for x, see what the outcome is, and we're also going to learn how to simplify algebraic terms. So for example, let's say I put the number 3 into x equals 3. Now if I give you a question, if x equals 3, what is x plus 2? What is x plus 2? So then obviously it'll be x plus 2 equals, so you're going to put the number 3 into x, so it'll be 3 plus 2, which will be 5. So that is simply substituting x into an equation. So that should be pretty easy. Now, if I write a number in front of x, for example, if I write 6x, that simply means 6 times x. Okay, now if x equals 3, 6 times x will be 6 times 3, which will be 18. Okay, now let's do another one. If x equals 3, what about 3x plus 2? That'll be 3 times x is 3 plus 2, which will be 9 plus 2, which will be 11. So all of these questions relate to substituting x into an equation. Now let's try substituting two variables into an equation. If L equals 5 and W equals 10, L times W equals 5 times 10 equals 50. And so you might say, what is the point of using letters? Well, L times W, length times width, is actually the area of a rectangle. So if we have a rectangle, so this is a rectangle where we have right angles in all four corners, and let's say we have the length and the width, then the area is length times width. So if you have learned this one before, you have actually used a lot of algebra already just by substituting the numbers into an equation. Okay, now let's learn how to simplify algebraic equations. Simplifying algebraic equations. Okay, now, oops, can't really draw straight lines properly on this. Okay, so now I'm gonna start with addition. What is 3x plus 2x? Now let's try experimenting this with a number. So if x equals 2, 3x is 3 times x, which is 3 times 2, which is 6. 2x is 2 times x, which is 2 times 2, which is 4. So 3x plus 2x is 6 plus 4 is 10. Now, when you are adding algebraic terms, it's actually easier to just add the number at the front of x, number in front of x, and we call this the coefficient of x. Coefficient of x. And when you're adding algebraic terms, you actually only add the number in front. So 3 plus 2 is 5x. Now let's test it to see if this is correct. So 5 times x is 5 times 2, which is also 10. So therefore, from the example we have shown here, 3x plus 2x is 5x, and it works for when x is 2. Now let's try if x is 3. If x equals, let's try another number, 6. Okay, now what's 3 times 6 plus 2 times 6? Right, using the equation here, 3 times x plus 2 times x. So 3 times x plus 2 times x, and we substitute in 6 for x, so 3 times 6 is 18, 2 times 6 is 12, and 18 plus 12 is 30. Now 5 times x, 3 times x plus 2 times x is 5 times x. Using our general rule that when you are adding two terms, you add the coefficient in front of x. So 5 times x is 5 times 6, which is 30. So it also works. So it has worked for when x is 2, has worked for when x is 6. You can try an unlimited number, see if you can prove that 3x plus 2x is not 5x. If you can prove it with a value of x, then you have done something extraordinary. So when you are adding in algebra, you add the coefficients of x. Now keep in mind, this will only work if both letters are the same, exactly the same. So if we do 3x plus 2y, then it won't work. Okay, you cannot say that it's 5xy. Okay, it doesn't work. So 3x plus 2y will just be 3x plus 2y. You cannot simplify it. And the same thing as if we have 3x plus 5x squared. X and x squared are not the same. So you can't simplify that either. Well, not by just adding the coefficients. And we're going to talk about how to simplify this later on, but you can't add the coefficients. A lot of people think that 3x plus 5x squared is 8x cubed. That's definitely not correct. Okay, so don't do that. Okay, so that is addition in algebra. Subtraction is exactly the same, so we'll briefly touch on that. If we have 6x minus 4x, you just minus the numbers in front and it gives you 2x. Okay, 10x minus 8x is 2x, and so on. Okay, so practice these questions. Actually, I'm just going to say simplify these expressions. Number 1, 5x plus 3x. Number 2, 10x minus 2x. Number 3, 15x minus 2y. Number 4, 5xy plus 2xy. Okay, try them and come back and see what the answers are after you're done. Okay, so 5x plus 3x is 8x, 10x minus 2x is also 8x, 15x minus 2y, you can't do it because they're different terms. They have to be exactly the same to do same letters for you to minus them. 5xy plus 2xy, these variables are exactly the same. So 5xy plus 2xy is 7xy. Okay, so these are adding and subtracting. Now let's do multiplying algebraic terms. Now if we have something like 5x times 2x, what is the answer? Okay, we're going to try it with a numerical example. If x equals 4, 5x times 2x will be 5 times 4 times 2 times 4. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 times 2 times 4 is 8. So that'll be 160. Now 5x times 2x can actually be simplified as 5 times x times 2 times x. And one of the rules in multiplying is you would have noticed that 5 times 2 or 5 times anything, let's use a different color. Let's say 5 times 4 is the same thing as 4 times 5. Okay, they're both 20. Alright, so you can try it with any number. If you reverse the order, 3 times 2 times 6, it'll give you the same as 2 times 6 times 3. Alright, so the order doesn't matter when you're multiplying. So the same thing applies here. We can change the order to 5 times 2 times x times x. Now 5 times 2 is 10. X times x, the short way of writing that is x squared. Now what about x times x times x? The short way of writing that is x cubed. So therefore we have 10x squared. So the answer here is 10x squared. 5x times 2x is 10x squared. Let's do another few examples. If we have 7x times 3x, 7 times 3 is 21, x times x is x squared. What about 7xy times 5xy? So if you write out all the terms, it becomes, if you write out all the terms separately, it becomes 7 times x times y times 5 times x times y. Because order doesn't matter when you're multiplying, it becomes 7 times 5 times x times y times y. So you're left with 35 x squared y squared. Now hopefully you won't need to write it out like that when you're doing these questions once you become more familiar with them. So now let's do a few practice questions. Simplify these expressions. Number 1, 4x times 2x, 3x times 7x, 21x. Actually, let's do one where we combine times and plus. 2x times 5 plus 3x. 2x times 5x plus 2x squared. 5x times 3y plus y. Okay, try these questions, come back and check the answer when you're done. 4 times 2 is 8. X times x is x squared. 3 times 7 is 21. X times x is x squared. 2x times 5. Now 5 does not have an x, so therefore you can only do 2 times 5, which equals 10x, plus 3x is 13x. 2x times 5x is 10x squared plus 2x squared, which gives you 12x squared. 5x times 3y is 15xy plus y. Well, you can't do it because the letters are different. You can't add two terms together if they have different variables. Okay, so that's how you multiply equations. Now let's see how to divide algebraic equations. Division. So we have something like 10x divided by 5x. Okay, now this is where you need a little bit of knowledge with fractions, because when you have the divide sign, you can rewrite this as a fraction, 10x over 5x. Now in fractions, if you have 10 divided by 5, 10 divided by 5, you can simplify them by writing each number as their factors. So 10 equals 5 times 2. 5 is just 5 times 1. And when you have a number, a factor that is the same in both the numerator and the denominator, they cancel down to 1. Because if you think about it, 5 divided by 5 is 1. So you can cross out the numbers, change them to 1. 5 divided by 1 is 1. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So on the top you have 2, on the bottom you have 1. 2 divided by 1 is 2. Okay, so 10 divided by 5, this part here, we can cross that out and change that to 2. And x divided by x, well, anything divided by itself, as we've seen here, is equal to 1. So x divided by x is 1. So therefore we can cross them out and change it to 1. So 2 times 1, the answer is 2. Let's try another one. 15xy divided by 10x. So 15, you can rewrite that as 3 times 5 times x times y. 10, you can rewrite it as 2 times 5 times x. So 5 divided by 5, cancel them out. X divided by x, cancel them out. So we're left with 3y on the top and 2 on the bottom. Now let's try 15x squared y cubed over 30xy. Okay, so writing them out, we have 15 times x times x times y times y times y over 30 times x times y. Okay, now when we are crossing things out, remember you can cross out an x once from the top and an x once from the bottom. So this x here, it remains on the top, you can't touch that one. And then when we cross out an y from the top, we cross out another one from the bottom. So you're left with y times y on the top. Now 15 over 30, you can simplify that down to 1 over 2, because both of these numbers can be divided by 15. 15 divided by 15 is 1. 30 divided by 15 is 2. Or if you want to simplify it using the way that we showed you before, you can rewrite 15 as 3 times 5. Oops. 3 times 5. And 30 you can rewrite it as 15 you can rewrite it as 15 times 1, and 30 you can rewrite it as 15 times 2. So now you can cross out 15 on the top and 15 on the bottom, so you're left with 1 over 2. So the answer is x1 times x times y squared over 2. And that is your final answer for division. Okay, so do some practice questions. Simplify these expressions. Okay, let's do xy cubed over x 5y cubed z, this is a z, 2 over z, y. And 30y squared over 2x. Okay, try them and come back and check the answers. Okay, so the first one, we got x on the top, x on the bottom, so we're left with y cubed. Second one, we have y on the bottom, 3 y's on the top, y times y times y. So if we cross out 1, we're left with y to the power of 2. So 5y to the power of 2 z. Z to the power of 2 on the top, z to the power of 1 on the bottom. So we're left with 1z on the top. Third one, 30 over 2 is 15 over 1. So it's 15y squared over x. Okay, hopefully after watching this video you have a better idea of how to simplify algebraic terms. See you in the next lesson.